Hello and welcome back to Stop and Go F1 for this, our driver ratings for the Dutch Grand Prix. If you haven't seen this before, we're going to look at every single driver and give them a score between 1 and 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. Although I have gone to 0 before, and I have been to 11. Only once though. Will that happen this week? Let's find out. Before we get into it though, remember to like and subscribe, and a big shout out to our members, the Joyous James, Dakota, Robin Myers and Sarah Strubble. So let's get started with the person we always start with. It is Kevin the Mag Magnussen. Now, it's a tale of two halves at the Haas team. Magnussen, not a great race. So, qualifies all right. I think he was like 13th or 14th. But then they elect to change parts on his engine, which means he starts from pit lane. And he ends up finishing the race in 18th. They just left him out for ages. And there's that one bit of the race where about 3 or 4 cars overtake him into one corner because he's just been left out there for so long. Overall, though, not really much to shout about in terms of Kevin Magnussen. I'm going to give him a 4. Not a great one for Magnussen. On the other side, though, there's Nico Hülkenberg, who had a very good race. So he qualified 12th, finished off in 11th, was in the top 10 till the very closing moments. I think Alonso got him in the end. But yeah, overall for Hülkenberg, still a good race. Hülkenberg's having a fantastic year this year. In my mid-season driver ratings, I had him in the top 5, and I only saw one person complain about that, which is a record low of complaints I had for any driver on the mid-season ratings. But I think he's doing a fantastic job. I fear for him next year because Sauber are dreadful, and I don't see them improving next year. So we might not see these fantastic performances from him. Or who knows, we might see even more fantastic because he's in an awful car. But yeah, for this weekend, I'm going to give him an 8 because I think he did a very good job. And speaking of Sauber, here they are. Zhou Guanyu, I think, had one of his best qualifying performances of the year, despite setting the slowest time. So his time was the slowest of anyone who set a time, but you had Logan Sargent who didn't set a time, you had Albon who was disqualified, and you had Magnussen starting from pit lane. So Zhou Guanyu starts on the grid 17th place, which I think is like his 5th best of the year. So a good start for Zhou. And then it just went backwards. He ended up finishing dead last. No one DNF'd in this race, so he finished dead last. But not only was it dead last, he was... both Saubers were lapped twice, the only cars to be lapped twice in the entire race. And Zhou Guanyu was 32 seconds off the back of Valtteri Bottas. A dreadful year for Zhou. Continues to get even more dreadful. And I think people aren't truly realising how bad of a year this is for Zhou, just because they expect the Saubers to be like 19th and 20th. So when they're 19th and 20th, it's not a surprise. But yeah, it's still not great. So Zhou gets a 2. Across to Bottas. Bottas actually did quite well. So, I say quite well, it's in a Sauber, so quite well is still dreadful. 16th place for Bottas in qualifying. Again, massively benefiting from the likes of, well, maybe not Sargent. You'd think Bottas would beat Sargent, but benefiting massively from Magnussen and Albon. Then in the race itself, finishes 19th. Again, one of 2 cars to be lapped twice. Was over a lap behind Kevin Magnussen. Did do a 2-stop for some reason. A lot of guys did a 2-stop that just didn't work. I mean, yeah, it's not great for Bottas. I'm going to give him a 4. But realistically, in this awful car, what can they do? Not much, it seems, this weekend. Across to Yuki Tsunoda now, who had not a great weekend for him either. Qualifying was okay. Actually, he qualified higher than Ricciardo did. He qualified in 11th place. But then towards the start of the race, Albon pits really early. So Yuki and Hülkenberg also pit early to cover Albon. But really, it was the complete wrong call to make, because I think by lap 33... Yuki had pitted twice, whereas there are some other people on the grid who hadn't even pitted once yet at that point. So Yuki just really set back by strategy this weekend. Let's have a look. He finished the race in 17th place, not too far behind Sargent, but he was battling Sargent basically for the entire race, and at a track where it's difficult to overtake, he didn't overtake. So Yuki Tsunoda, I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. Meanwhile, Daniel Ricciardo, as I said, qualified lower, qualified in 14th place, but he would finish the race in 12th. Now, see, this is the difference between the one stop and the two. They covered off Albon really early with Yuki, forcing him onto that two-stop. He ends up in 17th place, despite starting in 11th. Daniel Ricciardo went from 14th to 12th on a one-stop and was not too far behind the back of Hulkenberg. Ricciardo having the much better weekend because Racing Bills messed over Yuki instantly. Despite that, I am going to give Ricciardo a higher score, though, just because he did finish higher. I mean, Racing Bills, they should really be a little bit higher. I'll give him a 7. I wrote down an 8 on my piece of paper. I'm changing it to a 7. There we go. 7 for Daniel Ricciardo. Across to Williams now. And Logan Sargent had that huge crash in FP3. Because of that, could not set a time in qualifying. Despite this, would start the race in 18th, which, much like Zhou, is one of his best qualifyings of the year. I think it's his joint 6th best qualifying of the year there for Logan Sargent. I mean, you've got to give him some commendation here to have a crash that big. I mean, not only is it a huge crash alone, then the car is on fire, and the fire marshals were basically working in slow motion because the car was sat there on fire for a hell of a long time before Logan got out the car, and even longer before any marshal got near the car. So overall, it's a very scary accident, what he had there. So you've got to give him some commendation to go, you got back in the car and pushed really hard in the race. So, you've got to celebrate him from that point of view. He would finish in 16th place, which again I think is one of his better results. Like I said, he was defending against Yuki for most of the race, Yuki who was in a much faster car. So I think it was a decent race for Logan Sargent. I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. Then there is Albon. Albon had an incredible qualifying in 8th place, which I think is either his first or second best qualifying of the year. He might have got a 7th at one point, maybe in Canada or Monaco, something like that. But yeah, still one of his best qualifyings of the year. Gets disqualified due to the floor not being within the rules or whatever they said it was, and then has to start from 19th. Then fights through to finish up in 14th. I mean, a great race from him to end up in 14th place. Realistically, he probably wouldn't have gone forward from 8th if he'd started in 8th, but he definitely would have been in the fight for the points there with the pace that he had. So overall, I see good things from Albon, and he's one of those guys who did that two-stop, and it kind of worked for him. 19th to 14th, I think, is all right. So I'm going to give Albon, it's a 7 or an 8 for him. I'll give him an 8 just because that qualifying was incredible, even though it didn't count. But there you go. You can moan about that one in the comments if you like. Ocon now, and like many teams we've seen, like Haas, like the Racing Bills, Alpine is another team where one driver did very well and the other driver did not. Ocon is the one who did not. He qualified 15th and finished 15th, which, for an Alpine, you think, oh, well, that's not that bad. But then you see what Gasly did and you go, oh, okay, Ocon was quite a bit off the pace of Gasly this weekend. So Ocon gets a 5. Let's talk about Gasly, though, because my God, this was fantastic. What an amazing drive from Pierre Gasly. Possibly his best one of the year so far. Fantastic qualifying sees him in 9th. I think he was one of the guys who benefited from Albon. But then in the race again, finishes 9th, gets 2 points for the Alpine team. And every time he was on screen, he was either attacking or defending with all of his heart. It was really entertaining to see. For me, one of the drivers of the day. There is someone else who is wearing red that I think is also in contention for the driver of the day that didn't win driver of the day officially. But for me, Gasly was up there as well. It is easily a 10 out of 10 for Pierre Gasly. Let's go to Lance Stroll now in the Aston Martin. He qualified in 8th, a good qualifying for Stroll, but just went backwards, ended up finishing in 13th. The Aston not in a great place right now, as it has been for most of this year. Quite a tough one if you are an Aston fan to watch this year, but I'm sure there's something just around the corner which will make them all happy, and it rhymes with D'Adrian Huey. Little hint there. Anyway, Stroll, give him a 6. There you go, you can have a 6. Fernando Alonso now, he qualified in 7th place, ended up in 10th, just getting a point for Aston. I mean, realistically now, that's all they can hope for. You know, I've said this many times, but when you have 4 teams like McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes, who are that much ahead of everyone else, those top 8 places are pretty much secure. You know, unless like Checo has a bad day, those top 8 places are secure. So really, everyone else is fighting for 9th and 10th. So you have the likes of your Racing Bills, your Alpines, your Astons. They're all fighting for either 1 or 2 points. So when you have someone like Fernando Alonso in an Aston which is underperforming, getting a 10th place and getting 1 point, that's actually a very good result for them, because the gap between the top 4 and the rest is so huge. So I'm going to give Alonso an 8. Very good race from him. Now, Oscar Piastri. I'm just going to say it. I don't think it was a great race from him. So he qualified 3rd and finished up 4th. And on the surface of it, you go, oh, that's pretty good. But then I was thinking about it, and imagine, right, if it was Max Verstappen who had won the race by 22 seconds, and then it was Sergio Perez who was finishing 4th and couldn't get past a slower Ferrari. Everyone would be going, oh, bloody Perez, he was miles off his teammate. But here, you know, Lando wins by 22 seconds. You have Oscar, who's in 4th, not being able to get past a slower Ferrari, despite the the McLaren easily being the fastest car on the track. And as much as I love Piastri, and I think he's absolutely fantastic, I don't think this was the best race from him this weekend. So it's going to be a 6, which, you know, is still, I feel, quite nice, because he's still got some decent points. But realistically, in that car, he should have been on the podium, because he was quite a bit faster than the Ferrari. At one point, it looked like a clear McLaren 1-2, but the work of Charles Leclerc saved not only Charles Leclerc, but Max Verstappen as well. Here's his teammate, though, Lando Norris, qualifies on pole, does lose out at the start yet again, but gets the lead back on around about lap 20, I think it was, and then from there was just untouchable, finishing with, like I said, 22-second lead. Just fantastic from him, really. It is easily a 10 out of 10 for Lando Norris. Really good stuff there. Scary is what it really is. I think it's the first time since Saudi Arabia 2021 that anyone whose name isn't Max Verstappen has had an over 10-second lead at the end of a race. So, yeah, real dominant stuff from Lando Norris here to get his 2nd win. Fantastic. Let's go to Ferrari now. And Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz qualified 10th, finished up in 5th place. Bad qualifying from Sainz. Actually qualified 11th. Didn't make it through into Q3, but then got pushed up thanks to Albon being disqualified. But in the race itself, was pretty good, making some good moves at the start. Finishing 5th, I think realistically, the Ferrari was probably the 4th fastest car. I think the Mercedes was faster than the Ferrari this weekend. I know the results don't reflect that, but I think that's a mixture of one of them had a bad qualifying and the other one had an awful strategy. Mercedes just throwing away points this weekend. But yeah, Ferrari doing pretty good. 5th place for Sainz. I'm going to give him an 8. And then we spoke before about Gasly being one of my drivers of the day. Here's the other one, Charles Leclerc. Oh my God. I think it's really being underrated how much of a good job he did. So he qualifies in 6th place, but finishes on the podium in 3rd. Yeah, really fantastic stuff from Charles Leclerc. You know, we talk all the time about like drivers making a difference. But Charles Leclerc is a driver who's making a difference here. Much in the same way that I think Max is making a difference in the Red Bull and outdriving that car. Charles is doing the exact same thing in that Ferrari, because that Ferrari should not be on the podium. Like I said, I think it was the fourth fastest car this weekend. You had McLaren, who were easily the fastest, and then you could say Red Bull were second. I'd put Mercedes third, and then Ferrari fourth. So realistically, he should be, sixth? But, I mean, that's where he qualified. But to finish on the podium, to defend against Piastri like he did for lap after lap after lap after lap, really, really good stuff. Easily 10 out of 10 for Charles Leclerc. Let's go to talk about Mercedes now. Let's talk about George Russell. Oh, my good buddy George. So, over the summer break, the mid-season rankings came out. And basically what that is, for those of you who didn't see it, was I took every score that I've given in these rankings, added them all up, and then rated them from highest to lowest on what that score was. And George Russell was criminally low. He was like 18th on the grid, which in the video I say that's far too low, and I think doesn't help from the fact that I have a rule that if you get disqualified from a race, you get 0 points, and he'd just been disqualified from that race that he won, which realistically he would have got a 10. So that video went out, and I said he's criminally low, and then the comments went mad because he was criminally low. So I thought to myself, right, I'm going to correct this. In the next coming races, I'm going to be really nice to George Russell. No matter what happens, I'm going to give him a really high grade all the time. And then we come into this race, and he qualifies fourth, and I go, this is a good start. This is a good start. It's going to be really easy to give him a really high score. And he gets off the line. He's third place. He's overtaken Oscar Piastri and going, oh, this is the easiest 10 out of 10 I'm ever going to give George Russell. All the comments are going to love me for being so nice to George Russell. And then he pits, and he's lost a place to Leclerc, but it's okay. It's okay. It's still fine. He's still there with Leclerc. He's still following him around. And he loses a place to Piastri. I go, realistically, the McLaren is much faster, so that's okay. And then you see, right, so behind him is Sainz and Checo. He can still beat them. This is an easy top 5 finish for George Russell. He's doing really well here. And then Mercedes go, right, George, we're going to pit you again. And I go, that's probably not the best call. Not the best call from Mercedes there. So they pit him again. They give away a place to Perez. They give away a place to Sainz. And I go, okay, well, he's on the softs. Maybe he can catch them. And a few laps later, not only is he not catching them, but Lewis Hamilton, who started 10 places lower, has nearly caught Russell and is just over a second away. And I go, okay, this high score is getting harder to hand out. My goodness. So it's tough. It's really tough on this one, because I think Russell was doing well, and then Mercedes just completely messed it up with the strategy that they chose to give him. So, what to do with someone like George Russell is the big question here. Qualified 4th, finished 7th. Was just over a second away from his teammate. Mercedes really screwed him. I think, in all honesty, it's a 6. But then I'll give him an extra point because I think he had the pace and the strategy is what screwed him over. So that's a 7. And then I'll give him a point because I've been far too mean to him, apparently. So overall, George's awful race gets an 8. But I want you to know, I'm not happy about it. Here's Lewis Hamilton. So Hamilton had a bad qualifying. He qualified 12th. Then he got a 3-place grid penalty, which pushed him down to 15th. Then Albon got disqualified, which pushed him up to 14th. And then Magnussen went to the pit lane, which pushed him up to 13th. So Lewis moving around quite a bit in qualifying, but still nowhere near the pace he should have had. Starts on the softs, one of the 3 drivers to start on the softs. The first half of that first stint, not too good, but the second half, once the tyre got into the right window, he was really good, flying at that point. Then throughout the race, he's making some good moves. They pit him twice. They get him on the softs at the end, which, unlike the Russell move, was actually quite a smart move because he had a 24-second gap to Hülkenberg, so you might as well try it out at that point. And it looked like it worked for him in the end. Just over a second off Russell. What was the actual gap at the end there. Hamilton... Oh, no, it was much more than that, sorry. It was 4.9 seconds off of Russell. There you go. I'm sure they were closer than that at one point, but there you go. 4 seconds off Russell at the end. But overall, I think a good recovery from a bad qualifying. I'm going to give him a 7. Like I said on my race reactions video, when the driver of the day vote thing popped up and I saw Lando was first, I thought, well, obviously, because there's a whole section of the F1 fan base that just adore Lando, so he is always going to be first. Second was Leclerc, and I thought, that's understandable, Leclerc's doing a great job. Then I saw Hamilton in third, I was like, I don't think he deserves to be the third best driver on the grid today, especially when Gasly was there doing what Gasly was doing, but still a very good recovery drive from Lewis Hamilton. Here's Sergio Perez, everybody, who I think did a very good job. Qualified 5th, finished 6th. I mean, qualifying, look who beat him. Lando, Max, Piastri and Russell. I mean, you can't complain about any of those guys beating him, realistically. And then in the race itself, finishes in 6th place. I think that's where that car should be. I don't think there was anyone ahead of him who realistically should have... Well, maybe he could have beaten Sainz. Maybe you could argue... Yeah, I mean, realistically, the Ferrari was slower than the Red Bull. But still, I think a good job from Sergio. Good job, Sergio. 7 out of 10. And finally, here's Max Verstappen. Qualifies 2nd, takes the lead at the start of the race, leads for about 20 laps, then loses the lead to Lando Norris, and then from there was realistically just in a race of his own. Didn't have the pace to challenge Lando, but had far more pace than Leclerc and Piastri did, so was just kind of in his own little race in 2nd. I mean, you can tell how good of a job Max Verstappen did this weekend by the fact that I think Martin Brundle praised him at one point. He said something like, that's the Max Verstappen factor, or something like that. So I was like, bloody hell. If Martin is noticing that it's Max who's helping out Red Bull here and not the other way around, he must be doing something right. And I think, realistically, what could Max have done better this weekend, you know? In terms of pole position, he wasn't that far off. It was like 3 tenths or something. Let me check. Yeah, 3 tenths to Lando in qualifying, but still beat the other McLaren. Took the lead at the start, led relatively well. I mean, considering when you see the pace of the McLaren at the end of the race, the fact that it took 20-odd laps for Lando to get past him really shows how good Max was doing at the start of that race. And then from there, you know, what else can he do? Realistically, nothing. So I'm giving Max a 10 because I don't think he could have done any better than what he did. There you go. That is our ratings there. So a few 10s given out. Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Pierre Gasly. Lowest rated driver goes to Zhou Guanyu. Let me know what you think. I'm sure you will. We'll be back next week for the Italian Grand Prix. The preview will be on Friday. Then we'll have coverage of qualifying and the race and driver ratings, of course, there as well. Also, F2 is back and it's the F3 finale. We will crown the Formula 3 champion for 2024. So a very exciting weekend to come up next weekend. Make sure you subscribe for all of that. Until then, though, have a good one. I'll see you later. Goodbye.